Thank you to P&A for having me here. I so look forward to this time together, and I hope that we can have some fun. I've been in Memphis since 1984, and have enjoyed the journey here, and I'm still enjoying it. This is my lovely family, my lovely wife, and she is a co-owner of Neurosource, and my lovely daughters. She happens to have green hair now, and she has blue hair now. Part of our story. And it's an ongoing story. Here we are at the top of the pyramid, one of Memphis's stories. And as I speak to you, I know that no one here can dissect their lives without tearing their story apart. Our story is what makes us who we are. And I want to integrate my story and help you think about how your story fits into this story that I'm telling. This is a little of my story and why I happen to be a clinical neuropsychologist and a quantitative EEG Diplomate and Neurofeedback certified provider. This is my little brother, Dean. He was born with cerebral palsy. And if you don't recognize me, here I am. He was my closest companion, and we grew up together. He was not quite 2 years younger than I, and we shared a room, bunk beds, we shared our time together, but he was very disabled in the sense that he could not move voluntarily. He couldn't eat, he couldn't walk, he couldn't talk, but yet we were the closest of buds. We spent a lot of time together and did many things together. And one of the things that I realized as I grew up with Dean was that he was very intelligent. He and I would watch all those wonderful shows that I'll probably be dating myself. I probably already have by the photograph. But we watched I Love Lucy and Andy Griffith and McHale's Navy and Laughing. I grew up watching all these shows. Carol Burnett, Red Skelton. Anybody remember those? Okay, I'm in the right group. And he and I, our most favorite activity to do was to laugh. We laughed together, and I discovered that he was more intelligent than I because he got the jokes before I did. And some of them he got and I didn't. So despite the fact that he couldn't demonstrate his intelligence, he would have failed any IQ test, would have been judged completely mentally retarded, yet he was more intelligent than I, and I knew it. And I tried to understand in my infantile way growing up what it was that was the problem and how it could be fixed. I was a fixer. What's the problem? Find an answer, get it fixed. And I discovered through my research that he had cerebral palsy. It was a brain disorder. What's a brain? Well, it's kind of like the engine of the body. It's the engine of consciousness. And so I began focusing on that very early in life, discovering that there are ways you can influence the brain. Read some way out there stuff on the power of the subconscious mind and found psychology and things like that. But as we get back to the point of this talk, age-proofing your brain, the question we must start with is, why? Why do you want to age? Well, there's only one alternative. So if you want to age, you want to go on living. But why? Why would you want to go on living? It's a complex question, but I think the answer can be very simplified into The only reason we want to go on living is to continue to have what I call and what has been called and what could be called unitive experience. We want to feel connected. We want to feel connected with ourselves, with each other, with the universe, with the future, the past, that which transcends time, space. We want to be connected. We want to have ongoing, unending, increasingly accelerating, unitive experience. Because that's what the universe is doing. You know, we've got this thing called science, and we've looked very, very close at the universe, and we looked very, very big and far away at the universe, and that's what the universe is doing. It started out in what we call a singularity, and that singularity is still a singularity. It's a one universe that is expanding, and its expansion is accelerating, and we want to ride that wave. We want to feel it. Not in an alone and isolated, disconnected type of way. We want to be remembered and to remember. And when we look at aging and we see what happens to many of us, most of us, maybe all of us, as we age, is we don't remember very well. We disconnect. We forget. But we don't want that. We want to remember. We want to connect. We want to keep connecting. And so the why is so big. We have to keep asking that question. Why am I going on? And when someone loses a good answer to that why for them, that's when we start to die. We start to forget. We start to lose connection. And that's when we age. And these bodies are going to age, so there's a bigger why. And most of us have probably been taught some type of religious tradition, which is what keeps us connected in a lot of ways. Religion is that which religaments or reconnects. We want to connect. We want to remember. And so religion is a cultural thing that we do to do that. Physics is a scientific thing that actually ends up doing the same thing if you look closely enough, because we've discovered that the universe cares. The universe cares when we look. Quantum physics tells us when we look at the universe, it changes. Every particle we look at knows we're looking. It knows when we look and how we look. The probability waves collapse into particles when we look at them, or probability waves when we're not looking. So the universe cares. So there's this big picture that you want to have, and we all want to have. And whether you get it from a religious tradition, or if you're an atheist and you don't like those, get it from physics. But you want to connect. You want to reconnect. You want to be connected. And that's what keeps us alive. And that's what keeps us moving. And that's what I am. I am a facilitator of unitive experiences. I just happen to use neuroscience as one of my major tools, and functional neuropsychology and functional medicine, because that's what we want to do. We want to connect with ourselves, with each other, and the universe. And that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. We want to be happy. Now, if you study in positive psychology, we've dissected happiness, and it comes down to three basic things. We want to have autonomy. We want to be free. We want to have competence. We want to feel effective. And we want to have relationship. We want to be connected. And if you boil it all down, the autonomy and the competence all are about connecting and relating. We want to have that ongoing unitive experience, and that's what we call happiness. And we all have the inalienable right to the quest for happiness. The happiest man in the world was said by a Time magazine article to be Mathieu Ricard, I think it's pronounced. And why was he called the happiest man in the universe? Happiest man in the world? Well, it's because they measured his brain waves. Put all these little electrodes on his head, and they quantified the electrical signals in his brain. And we happen to know enough about the brain that when you have certain types of electrical activity in certain parts of the brain, that's when you feel happy. That's when you have unitive experience. That's when you are connected with yourself, with each other, and the universe. And this guy, he was a biologist, a geneticist, who gave up all his academic career to become a Tibetan monk. And now he's considered the happiest man in the world because he can produce so much left prefrontal gamma in his EEG that they deemed him the happiest man in the world. Interesting, right? There he is with the Dalai Lama. Both look very happy at the moment. This is Matthew and Richie Davidson, the researcher that quantified his EEG and is also a researcher into the brain and what the brain does when we're happy, what the brain does when we meditate. And I want to be mentioning some of those things later. And here is an EEG. This is a measurement of the electrical activity of your brain, something I do in my office every day. And with those little squiggly lines, we can actually do a real-time neuroimage of your brain, show it to you in such a way. Remember, the universe cares when you're looking? So does your brain. He can show you your brain in such a way that you can change it in real time. Just like you can exercise your bicep by doing curls, you can change your happiness muscle by doing EEG biofeedback or meditation or a lot of other kinds of things. But this is an EEG. It's the electrical activity of your brain. It's what's allowing you to have consciousness right now. We take the electrical activity of your brain away, you lose consciousness. That's what we call brain death. Not a popular state to be in. The EEG frequencies have meaning in that it's an arousal continuum. You can be under-aroused and unconscious. You can be over-aroused and panicked. And what we want to do is we want to somehow achieve flow. We want to be in the middle. Just like when you're driving down the road, you don't want to be crashing up against one curb or the other. You want to be driving down the middle. You want to have efficiency. And what I do often when I have to explain it, I call it Goldilocksing the brain. If you want to get your brain in the flow state, you have to get it just right on the arousal continuum. And you Goldilocks it. You tune up the different parts to do different things. And we all do this. We're all trying to do this. And we're all looking to do this better and better. I just apply neuroscience to help that occur. Different frequencies of brain waves indicate different levels of arousal. Like sleep states, or when we're in delta, inner reflection, and drowsiness are theta frequencies. These are cycles per second, or hertz. Resting state is alpha, meditative. Active thought is beta. Higher frequencies of different awake alert states are numbered, and we can look at the brain and see what a particular part is doing. We have to think of the brain, though, as having a lot of parts, each of which can be over or underactivated. With 100 billion brain cells, each of which can be over or underactivated, they cluster together in neural networks to cooperate to do these complex things like have consciousness, wake up, and show up, and grow up. And sometimes we need to clean up, like Charles told us. And we do that in many ways. That's what life is all about. But these little neurons, these little things are fascinating because each one of them by itself doesn't do much. But collectively, through them, we achieve everything that humans do. And it's the gamma frequency that they were measuring in Mathieu Ricard's brain that allowed him to be called the happiest man on earth. So what if you could tune up your brain for happiness? It's a question that I've often answered, and that's my quest, is to do that for me. So I have lots of expensive toys, and sometimes I share them. If you come to my office, I share them with you. But the good thing is, you don't have to have all these expensive toys to do some of this. I'm going to show you some of that. So all of the different parts of the brain do different things. And if you look at the brain from the back to the front, we have what's called the perception-action cycle. So our senses go in the back, seeing, hearing, touch, and our action comes from the front, the frontal lobe, motor movement, planning motor movement, deciding why to move and when to move, and so executive functions are in the front. That's our frontal lobe. That's why when you get hit in the frontal lobe, you probably are going to lose some of your executive functions. You may have some decision-making problems, and so you don't want to be banged around. You want to bang your head around. Those parts are all important. So the perception-action cycle is everybody's ongoing reality testing program. You're looking around, you're evaluating what's happening, deciding what to do, making a model of reality, and testing that model by doing something. Then it goes back around. You perceive how your action worked. If it didn't work too well, you adjust your model, adjust your action, test it again. We're constantly reality testing. We take it for granted. We don't even think about that most of the time because most of us are so good at it. It's just like driving. You've been driving so long, you can probably eat a burrito, put on your makeup, talk on your phone, all at the same time. But you probably shouldn't. Kids especially, because they think they can, but they really can't. But we get used to it. We're constantly doing that. Now, I want to tell you about 3 things. If you take anything away from this, 3 methods, 3 protocols that are going to help you age-proof your brain. The why is you got to have an ongoing reality testing model that is driven by unitive experience. You want to be in the flow state. You want to have the experience of, I'm connecting with myself, other people, and the universe. The universe cares. When I die, I don't really die because I'm going to be part of the universe. I'm never going to lose my connection with the universe. Even when this old body is gone, there's something that continues. And so that's the big why. And everybody has to develop and work through that on their own, whether you have a religious context to do it or some other context. But you don't want to be dismembered. You want to remember. And Alzheimer's is one of those horrid diseases that, according to Dale Bredesen, whose book I'm going to show you in just a moment and talk about his protocol, no one has to die from Alzheimer's anymore. That's a direct quote from him. And he's talking about the first program to prevent and reverse cognitive decline, not just Alzheimer's, but other forms of dementia as well. Does that sound wild? Does that sound unbelievable? Well, he's got research to show and prove it. So let's continue. So that's the first one. And we're going to go through what that program is. Now, even if you don't have the ability to go to a functional medical physician and do the Bredesen protocol, decades of research done by Richie Davidson, who is with Mathieu Ricard in the MRI machine, has also done research showing that if you're just a regular meditator, you're going to decrease the odds of dementia and Alzheimer's. You're going to lengthen your telomeres. You're going to have a longer health span. So you don't have to go to a doctor. You don't have to run some complex medical protocol. If you just meditate. What is meditation? Well, it's a constant process whereby you practice unitive experience in a way that works, whatever tradition you have. And that's kind of what he did. Richard Davidson demonstrated that you don't have to be Tibetan or Christian or Jewish for this to work for you. It alters your brain when you meditate. So that's number 2. And number 3 is this really comprehensive protocol that I've heard about, and it incorporates the previous 2. And it adds something that I call neuromeditation. If you're going to meditate, wouldn't you want to do it in such a way that was very personal and very specific to what your brain needs for you to increase your health span and your enjoyment of life and your ongoing experience of oneness and unity of experience? Well, that's what Goldilocksing your brain means. It means learning how to tune up your systems, multiple systems, into the sweet spot. Just like when I used to work in my grandfather's garage. Had a 68 Rambler American. Running pretty rough. Changed the spark plugs, didn't do much. So I asked JR, the shop foreman, kind of a cowboy-looking guy, kind of cryptic. He said, bring it in. So I drove it in. He listened to it as I drove in and said, timing's off. That's all he said. Walked over, picked up this gun, not an ordinary gun, had an electrical cord connected to it. It was a timing gun, I found out later. Opened the hood, shined the light on the flywheel, turned the distributor cap back and forth real slow and gradual, turned it one way and the engine almost died. Turn it the other way, it started humming. And he's shining the light on the flywheel, and all of a sudden, this little mark on the flywheel began to appear from nowhere. This was a blinking light. It wasn't just shining, it was blinking. And that flywheel was turning, and so that light suddenly stabilized in one spot. He had found the sweet spot of that 6-cylinder, 196 cubic inch Rambler American engine so that it hummed just right. And he had adjusted the timing. And that's what we have to do to tune up our engines. And our engines are a little more complex than a 68 Rambler American. But to Goldilocks your brain is a very personal thing. You've probably got more horsepower than a 68 Rambler, hopefully. But if you do it based on your personal biochemistry, neuroanatomy, experience, then you can Goldilocks your brain. And the process to do so is based on neuroscience. Now back to number one, the Bredesen protocol. This is a functional medicine protocol, scientifically based. He published one study with 250 subjects and found his protocol to be effective at reversing cognitive decline in neurodegenerative disease such as Alzheimer's and other kinds of dementia. So it works. He calls it the RECODE protocol, improves brain health by addressing insulin resistance. Anybody know what the consequences of insulin resistance is? Consequences are the big D, diabetes. Type 1, type 2, and now they're saying there's a type 3. Type 3 diabetes is called Alzheimer's disease, one type of Alzheimer's disease. Do you know what organ of your body uses more glucose than any other organ? Your brain. It can use up to 60%. It only weighs maybe 1% of your body weight, but can use up to 60% of your glucose. Do you know what it means to be insulin resistant? It means you can't burn energy. Do you know what cells in your body have the most energy burning organelles? So they're called mitochondria. Most cells have 100 or so. In the frontal lobe of your brain, your frontal lobe neurons have thousands of mitochondria. 10 times more than your average cell. Those are the energy burning organelles. And if you can't get energy to the energy burning factories, what's going to happen to the cells? They start to fail. Alzheimer's disease is a failure of executive function to the point of sometimes you can't even get up and move. You can't motivate yourself. You know where your motor strip is, your motivating motor in your brain? It's in the frontal lobe. You know where your premotor strip is, the part of you that gets you ready to move? Right in front of the motor strip. You know what your pre-motor strip is? Those are your executive centers. It's the frontal lobe that fails in Alzheimer's disease. That's why they're calling it type 3 diabetes. So those candies back there on the table, just walk on by. Just walk on by. Another problem that needs to be addressed is inflammation. We don't even know how many inflammatory processes are going on in our bodies. We eat toxins all the time, we breathe toxins, we walk around in environments that are toxic, and we get inflammation. We're constantly inflamed. And infections can just be chronic and inflammatory as well. Our hormones, nutrition, and trophic factors. So neurotrophins are those factors that grow brain cells, grow the neurons. And if you're not growing your neurons and your synapses back after all the trauma you go through and stress you go through, then they just keep failing. And we're supposed to, and we do, we produce neurotrophins. We're growing them back and beating them back down and growing them back, and that's just the process of life. Biological life is constantly doing that, recovering, having trauma, having stress, recovering, and that's our ongoing everyday process. But what if you keep having the stress and you don't produce those normal processes that help you recover? There's constant failure, downward slide, and that's what happens with dementia. Toxins, we walk around in a toxic environment, we don't even know all the toxins. Even physical trauma, like a motor vehicle accident, when you hit your head, your brain releases toxins to try to repair. And then you actually have to restore the connections. We saw those brain cells earlier. So each brain cell has about 20,000 outputs and a couple of thousand, 20,000 inputs and a couple of thousand outputs each, and those are the synapses, the connections. Every brain cell is just like a normal biological cell, but it has these neurofilaments, inputs and outputs. If you break off the inputs and outputs, what happens? They stop communicating. What is the brain? It's a massively parallel neural network. What happens if you cut the wire to your internet? You don't have a connection anymore. You have to be connected for it to work. So it's all about the connections. And so if you don't restore those connections on a regular basis, the system fails. And that's why the Bredesen protocol addresses all these issues, because those are the kinds of things that cause your brain to fail. So the problem with most of the FDA regulated or approved studies is that they're linear. They look at one cause and one effect. Alzheimer's is complex with many root causes. The RECODE protocol looks at 45 factors, metabolic markers that have to be simultaneously optimized. So it's complex, and it takes a systemic, nonlinear, dynamical approach to look at all those factors. And so it is a little bit more complex than your take this pill and you'll be cured. That's not going to happen with Alzheimer's disease. Hasn't happened yet. They're looking for the magic bullet. The magic bullet will not be found. The magic bullet is a systemic approach, and that's what works, and he's proven it. There are actually different kinds of Alzheimer's disease. Bredesen has documented, number one, the inflammation, glycotoxic. Anything that causes inflammation to the brain contributes to Alzheimer's disease. Glycotoxicity comes from an imbalance of glucose and insulin. Eat your vegetables. Don't live on desserts. Stop drinking sodas with every meal. Just cut out the sugar. Sugar becomes toxic. You can have some, just don't live off of it. It's about balance. It's about, not long ago, we didn't have 300 calorie soft drinks that we consume 3 times a day. Those didn't even exist not long ago. You look at the way we eat now, something's different about how we're aging with Alzheimer's increasing, and part of it is we're misbehaving with our sugar intake. Having high amounts of glucose in the blood creates inflammation. Having improper uses of insulin degrades its ability to act as a neurotrophic brain growth promoter. We got to keep growing our brains, so cut back on your sugar. Then there's the metabolic trophin loss, and then there's the toxins. So he addresses these three subtypes in the ways that he uses with those 45 different measures. So as a functional medical approach, he's looking at your biology. Getting his book would be the best way to go about it. He's published the research. His book goes in more detail about how to do this. He's reversing dementia with the Bredesen protocol. And this is where he says, no one should die from Alzheimer's disease. So when you look at all these elements of toxicity, metabolic stress, insulin resistance, there's one thing that they all have in common. In different ways, they create stress. Stress is normal. You're going to have stress. Everybody's having stress. If you have zero stress, you actually grow weaker. These human bodies, this human life is supposed to have stress. But how much stress is the question? And how to manage that stress is the question. I want to bring up a couple of guys. Carl Friedrich Gauss. Anybody familiar with Gauss? Ever heard of the Gaussian distribution, the normal curve? He's actually one of the first people to ever describe that sweet spot I'm talking about. Things that occur naturally in nature tend to have a distribution. It's called the Gaussian distribution. He was a mathematician, very brilliant. You all probably remember the normal curve, if you had much education at all. And, you know, we know what average is. You know, there's an average height in this room. There's an average height in the world. There's an average height throughout all time. There's an average weight. There's an average intelligence. Those things, you know, are you above average or below average? That seems to be important to us. But there's a sweet spot, and that's the golden mean, they call it. Another couple of guys, Robert Yerkes and John Dodson, created what we call the Yerkes-Dodson law. Does that curve look familiar? Same shape, inverted U. And I bring this up because it's all about the Goldilocksing of your brain. It's about that sweet spot. It's about getting in the flow state. It's about getting in the middle. It's about getting things just right. It's about the story of the porridge. And what was it that Goldilocks wanted to eat? She wanted the porridge that was just right, the bed that was just right, the chair that was just right. Our brains want conditions that are just right. Not zero stress, but not too much stress. We want to get in that middle, that sweet spot. And we find that how we do that has a lot to do with our own engine of consciousness. So this is my own diagram that takes into account Yerkes-Dodson, Friedrich Gauss. So we can think of our performance axis as our old reptilian brain. We have a brain that gives us movement. The dinosaur brain, the brainstem and spinal cord actually enables us to move. It's connected. If you sever the spinal cord, there's no movement. Above that, we have what we call the limbic system, the emotional brain. So the performance brain or action brain, we can actually have worse performance or better performance, and it depends on our emotional arousal. If we don't care, we have low arousal and poor performance. If we care too much, we have low performance and high arousal. But the third brain is really what is the determining factor. It's the thinking brain. It's the cortex. It's where all those 100 billion neurons are. It's the part of us that gives us consciousness, that is aware that who we are, where we are, and whether or not we're in the flow, the sweet spot. And so I teach a lot about how to do your own experiential positioning system. You got a GPS in your car, you've got an EPS in your brain, your experiential positioning system. Am I in my own sweet spot? Learning how to ask myself the question, how am I doing? If I'm doing reasonably well compared to my capacity, then I'm thinking pretty straight. If I'm not doing well and I'm over-aroused, I've got some stinking thinking, and I need to problem solve. Might need some EMDR. I might need some counseling. I might need to adjust my biology. I might need to go to a functional medical person. And if I'm under-aroused, I'm not thinking enough. So I'm looking for my own capacity. And I'm looking for that sweet spot, that optimal performance zone, that peak performance zone. And I'm asking myself, how am I doing? And do I need to straighten out my thinking so that I can problem solve and look at options and make a plan? And Goldilocks my brain. So that's what I do. I help people do that. Problem solve, look at options. And here's the Goldilocks brain protocol. I'm supposed to finish at 1:45. I call it the cats are fun protocol after my favorite animal, Leo the cat, who lives in my house. It's consciousness centered. That's the C. You start off with the fact that it really is all about my consciousness. I want to maintain optimal consciousness as much as possible. But I realize I'm not in complete control of my consciousness because quite often I completely lose my consciousness completely outside of my control. If I'm conscious for several consecutive hours, I'm going to lose my consciousness. So I plan ahead, and I call that the management part. So I can self-regulate my conscious part of my day. Part of my day, I just manage it. I plan to be near a bed when I become unconscious rather than behind the wheel of a car. So that's a management technique. So there are many management techniques, but I want to learn to self-regulate as much as I can. So it's consciousness centered. And I want to be conscious of unitive experience. I want to be ongoing in my ability to generate and share and increase and accelerate my increasing happiness. My process is assessment-based. I use subjective assessment, teach you how to do your own experiential positioning system. Where are you experientially? And is there something going on that we can look at and problem solve? I teach you certain things like the ARF check. Am I awake enough, alert enough, relaxed enough, and focused enough? Teach you the question of not just how am I doing, but where am I going? It's called the reversing consequences gradient. Sometimes we have to do the hard thing and have negative emotion temporarily because I get the big payoff later. We call that work. So that's part of my subjective assessment. I've got to do my own subjective assessment. I got to get inside my own consciousness, learn to evaluate myself, and check out my own reality testing in an ongoing way. But there's also objective assessment, like that EEG that I showed you. EEG is the only neuroimaging technique that's fast enough to actually show you what your brain is doing in a way that you can change it in real time. So we can do EEG assessment, we can do behavioral assessment. As a neuropsychologist, I can test anything. I can test your IQ, I can test your reaction time, I can test your memory, your focus, your concentration. I can test short-term memory, I can test verbal abilities, visual, spatial abilities. So people come to me for neuropsychological evaluations, and I can test all those kinds of things. Most of the time I don't need a lot of that because intelligent people have an internal assessment that's fairly accurate. Someone who's injured, brain injured, we might actually have to test with formal testing. But we can do that. But it's assessment-based, objective as well as subjective. So your subjective is something you already have. Objective assessment is something a scientist like myself as a neuropsychologist could do for you. But it's training focused. It's not about giving you a pill. It's not about doing something to you. The Goldilocksing your brain method is about training you to get into your flow state in your ongoing unitive experience so you can continue to do that without the need for outside help. It's like jump-starting your engine. You ever jump-start a car? You're trying to go, and it's dead. So used to work for my granddad in his garage, and we would go out and jump-start cars. We'd connect up the battery cables, and this car was running, and then the other car would get some juice and it gets started. But when that's done, you disconnect the cables. You don't keep driving with the cables connected. That would be very awkward. So to jumpstart your engine, experientially and objectively is the goal, so that you don't need that kind of help anymore. So it's training focused. Training your own brain to regulate itself. Training your own consciousness to get into the Goldilocks state, to get things just right. Because that's what you want to do. You want to be autonomous. That's part of happiness. You don't want to be dependent upon anyone to give you pills or to do something to you constantly to keep you conscious. You want to be autonomous and competent in your own autonomy, as well as connected and relational. Now, sometimes we do some really, really cutting-edge neuroscience things called transcranial electrical stimulation. We use alternating current, direct current, random noise stimulation, very, very low power and current, but the brain is very sensitive. And sometimes, just like JR twisted the distributor cap with that timing gun shined on the flywheel, a little stimulation helps the brain pop back into a perfect timing, or a little shaking up, like when you used to tap on the radio. I don't know if you remember the radios before they had automatic frequency control. You'd be listening to a station and just kind of drift or get static, and you could just pop it on the side a couple of times and you hear the voice again. Without automatic frequency control, it would just drift. The tuner would drift a little bit, a little pop on the side, and it would tune itself back up. So sometimes stimulation literally helps the brain wake back up its own self-control mechanisms. Pulsed electromagnetic stimulation, transcranial electrical stimulation, light and sound stimulation, photobiostimulation, actually pulsed lights of different frequencies into the head have been found to decrease the amyloid plaques of Alzheimer's disease. It's amazing what we're discovering from neuroscience. We've got these powerful technologies now that are stimulation-based that can help jumpstart different systems of the brain. And they're amazing, absolutely amazing. I've got a vagal nerve stimulator. It's amazing. It's less than a Sony Walkman. And you can stimulate your own vagal nerve, which will decrease anxiety. It's amazing what's available on the market these days. And most of these things are consumer products that anyone can use. Just like how many of you are do-it-yourselfers and would change your own oil? Anybody ever used to change your own oil? Anybody ever tune your own car? Not a whole lot these days because they're kind of getting more and more complex. You can't even see the spark plugs anymore. Used to, you could go in there and take out a plug and put a new one in, but it just doesn't work like it used to. But that's kind of what these are used by people who are interested in kind of doing their own biohacking. And it's not that hard, and it's safe. These things have been deemed safe by the FDA, these stimulation devices, and they're very helpful. Now, the support-informed part is where you would use all the techniques of the Bredesen protocol. You can do genetic testing. You can see if you have the APOE gene variant, which increases your chances of getting Alzheimer's. You can look at and see if you have the MTHFR gene variant that makes you more susceptible to certain things. And you can change your lifestyle, change your diet, change your stress management through epigenetic counseling. We do that. You look at your genes and you start to know, what do I need to do unique to my own system to tune up my experience, to tune up my brain? Other things like exercise. How many of you know you need to exercise? Not everybody? Okay, let me tell you, you need to exercise, okay? It's just part of what we're built to do. We're built to move, and if you don't move, you're going to get sick. And that's part of what happens with Alzheimer's. Your motivator stops working, and you stop moving, and you start that downward spiral. Less movement, less able to move, less movement, less able to move. So you got to keep moving. You look at diet, you look at exercise, you look at social support, you look at the ability to have transcendent experiences, very good for your brain. We've measured it. Transcend. I'll tell you to do that. But the support part is very important. And we look at you look at your vitamins. It's easy to take vitamins, but it's better to take what your body needs for vitamins. Don't just pop a bunch of vitamins. Look at what your body needs. Look at what your genetics are. Look at what your blood work says. And that helps you specify how to Goldilocks your own system. And it's repetition augmented. The universe is what it is because it's been doing it for about 13 or 14 billion years. It has momentum. The human reptilian brain has been around for about 300 million years. It's got a lot of momentum. We have these biological, cosmic habits. And if you want to do something different, you have to establish a new habit. Most of you have been around for several decades. I won't mention how many, not even me, but we've been around for a while, so we've got habits. We've been thinking what we've been thinking, doing what we've been doing, eating what we've been eating, thinking how we've been thinking, and feeling how we've been feeling for quite some time. So if you're going to change any of that, it's going to take some repetition. So you establish new habits through some support, consciousness-centered, assessment-based training, focus, stimulation, enhancement, support, and you become a new self. We're literally, biologically and physically a completely different organism than we were 7 years ago. There's no atom in your body today that was in your body 7 years ago. Completely different. Your stomach lining turns over every few days. So different parts of our body are being changed, and so we're a new person. So take charge of that renewal, establish a new pattern, decide who you want to be, make a plan, and this is one of the things you can do. And this process should be fun by its very nature. The universe is having fun with us. We're supposed to be having fun with the universe. This is a great adventure. Do you ever feel like you're on this great adventure? It's a great mystery. I have no clue where it all came from, where it's all going, but somehow I'm waking up and here I am. You ever just look around and feel like, how did I get here? What am I doing here? Sometimes I feel like you're on a great adventure? It's supposed to, because you are. Nobody knows where we're going, where we came from. And yet, there's this movement, this growth, there's this waking up that we all feel. And we do it in the morning when we after sleeping, but there's another kind of waking up that we can actually consciously choose to have. It's been called many, many things: enlightenment, education, but it's a waking up. And then we start to realize that not only are we supposed to be waking up to this great adventure, we're supposed to be growing up. Because today I'm different than I was, and even though I'm growing older, we know this neuropsychologically, that the executive brain can keep getting better as we age. I might not have as quick a reaction time. I might not have quite so much of a certain type of intelligence, but the more I grow, the more I crystallize. I don't have as much fluid intelligence as I grow older, but I can keep getting more crystallized intelligence as I age. There's no limit. There really is. Unless I start to dismember. I start to fall apart. I start to disintegrate. So I want to be integrating. I want to be pulling myself together. And I want to be having fun with it, because that's how you actually manage your stress best. If you're enjoying the process, then stress hormones go away and all the health and healing hormones increase. They actually did a little experiment, put people on roller coaster. One group of people hated roller coasters. Another group of people loved roller coasters. When they got them all off, they measured their blood. The ones that hated roller coasters had elevated stress hormones, out, and had all kinds of stress in their bodies, adrenaline and cortisol. Their telomeres tended to be shorter. The people who got off the roller coaster that loved roller coasters, they had generated so much interleukin, like anti-cancer fighting biochemical, that it was worth millions of dollars if they had produced that much in a biology lab. They had increased their value of interleukin by millions. They were fighting cancer. They were actually healing from this wild and crazy roller coaster experience. That's why we're supposed to be having fun. It's a healing journey. And so we're waking up and we're growing up so we can show up, but sometimes we realize it hasn't been much fun lately and we need to do some cleaning up. And we all have that. We've had trauma, we've had toxins, we've abused ourselves and others, so the cleaning up is part of the process as well. Now, back to the one that you can do without any help from functional medicine or any neuropsychologist. You can meditate. This is a little illustration of the research. Look how from 1970 is about 0 up to the middle 2000 teens to over 1,000 publications. Why is that? We're discovering that you don't have to be a Buddhist or a Christian or Jewish or have any religious affiliation. You can be these are scientific studies. You can be a scientist and know that ongoing generation of unitive experience through meditation techniques is healing, is healthy, it pulls you together, it decreases your stress hormones, and increases your longevity, increases your telomere length, and decreases the chances that you're going to have Alzheimer's disease. And you don't have to ask anybody for permission or pay anybody a nickel. It's a very, very efficient way of age-proofing your brain. So I'm going to encourage you to do that. There are basically 3 classes of meditation in the literature: concentrative, mindfulness, and compassion, loving kindness. And by the way, the happiest man in the world, he was having all that left prefrontal gamma when he was doing compassion, loving kindness meditation. So he was voluntarily doing an activity that caused him to have connection and unitive experience with the entire planet. So lots of benefits to meditation in the literature. I want to bring you to a 4th class of meditation called neurofeedback or neuromeditation. You can have some cleaning up to do. You can have brain trauma. You can have developmental trauma. You can have diseases. And if it's found in your brain, you can use neuromeditation to literally Goldilocks your brain. This is a neuroimage from my office that I do called Loretta. This is an individual with a left frontotemporal abnormal function. All that red is where the reason why they have poor memory, have emotional dysregulation, sleep disruption. We don't even know where it came from. We don't have to. So this person, we did this neuroimage. We discovered where their timing was off. It needed a jump start. We trained their brain, and it looked like this. It went away. It wasn't just a change in their brain, it was a change in their experience. It was a change in their consciousness. We Goldilocks their brain through neurofeedback or neuromeditation. This is one of the ways that it can be done. Most people use something a little more interesting. But these little green dots are the locations that they're actually changing in real time based on their real-time EEG. So here's their EEG, and these are the selected regions that they're actually meditating on to tune them up. The universe cares when you're looking, so does your brain. And that's how they did it. They tuned up their brain through neurofeedback. So the brain very complex, but we understand the parts and their functions. We understand that we have an action brain, an emotional brain, but as humans, we want to be living more out of our human brain. We want to be not driven by dinosaur reptilian impulses or limbic impulses. We want to be driven by our higher humane processes, and that's why we focus on the human brain and its cortex. All these places have different functions. We know where they are, we know what they do. We can train them. So right now, you're either in your salience network, realizing something important's going on, or you're in your default mode network, where you're kind of daydreaming, sort of focused on what's inside your own head. That was one of the first discoveries in neuroscience, that when you're not doing anything, the brain uses more power in your default network than any other time. So when you're turning your brain off, you're actually increasing the power. If you want to have a more efficient brain, then you learn how to turn off your default network and get in your salient network. That's my presentation. Thank you.